Welcome to Living Legacy Leadership, where we explore, discover, and share insights, tools, and strategies for a life well lived into elderhood. I'm your host, Donna Kim Brand, author, speaker, legacy strategy coach, and creator of the concept Living Legacy, where you choose to live life on your own terms while contributing to people, places, and projects along your life journey. I believe that the life you live is the legacy you leave. Now, the guests I bring to you each week all address some unique aspect of learning, leadership, or legacy. This helps you raise your own game as a leader in business and life, and also showcases some extraordinary people who exemplify living legacy leadership. At least once a month, I also offer a training session to skill you in game changer thinking for your own application. So get your notebook ready or sharpen up your memory by tuning in your attention, and we'll dive right in. Now, today we're actually offering you something a little bit different. I am introducing you to the former Secretary of State, George Schultz. And we're going to talk about trust in government, which, by the way, should not be an oxymoron. Trust in government. Where this comes from, and my interest in reading about him and what he happens to say on trust, comes from my childhood ambitions of wanting to be either a doctor or an ambassador. And in a sense, though I became neither directly, I do have some medical history and experience, and I've also become an ambassador for human flourishing and human possibility and potential. And of course, the medical side beefed up by my interest in neuroscience and the brain and learning and creativity and thinking and so on. So in a sort of lateral thinking way, I have fulfilled at least partly those ambitions. But one of my children has become a member of the government in the State Department, and in the mail was dropped a magazine called the Foreign Service Journal. And so I took advantage of scouring through it, and it really made my heart race reading some of the exciting articles and topics that, I kind of had put aside for so many years while I was involved in so many other things. But what I'm going to do is, in this case, I'm going to read to you from an article by former Secretary of State George Schultz on trust. Now, Schultz served as the 60th Secretary of State from 1982 to 1989. He also served as the first director of the Office of Management and Budget, OMB, and as Secretary of Labor, and he was also a Secretary of the Treasurer. Since 1989, he's been a distinguished fellow at Stanford University's Hoover Institution. Now, here's the thing, talk about legacy. He is now in his 100th year. So I'm going to read to you this from his article, which is in the first person. I'm impelled by recent events to offer my thoughts about what I have come to believe is as crucial an element in public life as it is in private life. I am thinking about trust. We all instinctively, or from personal experience, know that good neighborly relations thrive when neighbors trust one another, and that life can become miserable if trust is replaced with suspicion and doubt. Trust is perhaps a more complex factor in life between communities and nations, but it's just as critical in determining whether cooperation or conflict, or even war and peace, will dominate the relationship. I've become deeply concerned in these last few years that distrust has become a common theme in our domestic life. It's now accepted as normal that our two great political parties rarely find common ground, and that legislation to advance the well-being of American citizens can be achieved only under the pressure of a great life-or-death crisis like the COVID-19 pandemic. It has taken a nationally circulated video of a black man's atrocious murder by a police officer, whose duties included training newcomers to a major American city's police department, to reveal the depths of racial distrust that exist in our country. Our relations with much of the rest of the world also have become characterized by distrust, bordering on hostility, even in the way Washington deals with close allies in Europe and Asia. We are nearing a Cold War II situation in our relations with China and Russia. Reliance on military threats with little or no effort at diplomacy is the most prominent feature of our relations with nations that we associate with anti-American sentiments and actions. Trust among nations, or between those who represent their nations in official discourse with other nations, should not be equated with burgeoning friendship or a change in fundamental beliefs on either side. The idea implies a belief that what a nation or public official commits to do will, in fact, be done. That means not only that honesty has become the accepted norm, but also that what a nation or its official representative says will happen is in fact also capable of being done. That is, the commitment is precise enough to measure its implementation, and the authority to carry out the commitment is assured. As President Ronald Reagan's Secretary of State, I had the President's backing to change the arms control paradigm from capping, in quotes, the buildup of U.S. and Soviet strategic nuclear forces to one of beginning to actually reduce the level of forces. We succeeded with the cooperation of General Secretary Mikhail Gorbachev in turning around the nuclear buildup so that 1986, the year of the Reagan-Gorbachev Reykjavik summit, became high watermark for that world's nuclear weapons instead of just another year of more and more nuclear bombs and warheads. Now, trust was key to reaching these agreements. The American president and his Secretary of State, that was George Schultz, who's speaking here, became convinced that Mikhail Gorbachev was a new type of Soviet leader, one who shared their concerns about nuclear weapons and could be trusted to carry out agreements. Of course, we used a Russian proverb to stress that verification had to be part of the deal. So, quote, trust but verify, unquote, became the common phrase. That brings us to another point about the meaning of trust. It has to be earned, which means that it has to be based on understandings and undertakings that can be seen to be carried out. After nearly 4 years of administration that seems to have assumed that American relations with the rest of the world is a zero-sum game, and that the game is based largely on the personal relations between national leaders, distrust abounds internationally. The ability of the United States government to execute the president's foreign policies has become severely limited by the lack of a clear and coherent method of formulating policy. The president's use of social media to make frequent public reversals and revisions in policies has made the job of American diplomats exceptionally complex. I see a need in the coming years to rebuild trust where now it is absent, based on policies that defend and advance American interests and ideals. The international system is consistently being reshaped right now. Trends in technology and economics, and even the pandemic, are having a major impact on how our country interacts with the rest of the world. With skillful diplomacy and visionary leadership, we can influence these trends and help to create an international system consistent with our values. Our partners in this effort will have to regain trust that we do indeed share the same democratic values, and that we really are working for an international system of nations that benefits all of us. Even our adversaries will have to regain the trust that we can work together to manage global threats to humanity's very existence, even when we disagree on other issues. This task may require more than a single presidential term to accomplish. At the beginning of Ronald Reagan's second term, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee invited me, this is George Schultz, whose article I'm reading, who was Secretary of State. They invited him to talk about the future and how American foreign policy might shape a world to our liking. I gladly met with them on January 31st, 1985. I recommended that the Senate convene a similar meeting in January 2021, so that's coming right up. and or whenever a new Secretary of State is in place, because strategic thinking is critically important in policymaking, and we have to get back to the habit, or as some observers might say, break new ground. In my remarks on that January day 36 years ago, I said, history never stops, adding that our duty must be to help shape the evolving trends in accordance with our ideals and interests. Another point I made in my talk with the Foreign Relations Committee that day is one that I want to expand on because it bears on the rebuilding that must take place in the federal government in general and in the State Department and its Foreign Service in particular. Referring to the new developments of those days, I said, our ways of thinking must adapt to new realities. We must grasp the new trends and understand their implications. I stress this point because, to me, an important implication of recent trends is that rebuilding the State Department and its Foreign Service, like nearly all the rest of the federal government, cannot mean simply replicating what was there in the Obama and Bush and earlier administrations. Technology has empowered American citizens so they can make their views known through social media and organize movements in the same way. This has changed the way politics and policymaking work in our country and elsewhere. Representative democracies have all reacted to these changes, though in different ways, and their diplomacy must also reflect these changes. Most governments, and I would say our own included, have not caught up with the new realities. The people who succeed the present generation of civil servants and members of the Foreign Service will be familiar with the new realities because they will have been part of them during much of their lives. But the ways in which the future leaders of the State Department and its Foreign Service manage the professional development of incoming diplomats and policy advisors will also require changes, and this is really hard to do. I was very pleased that during my tenure as Secretary of State, a National Foreign Affairs Training Center was established that absorbed the Foreign Service Institute. And I was proud that the center was given my name. As a former educator at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, the University of Chicago, and now Stanford University, I cherish this legacy and still do. One of the priorities of 2021 should be to review the resources devoted to the center in light of educational goals appropriate to the new realities. A few years ago, the UK government decided to create a British diplomatic academy for the first time in the long history of British diplomacy, probably in recognition of the fact that foreign policy, both in its making and its execution, had become dispersed through several ministries. The stated goals of the new academy included the vision of a, quote, foreign office that is an international center of ideas and expertise that leads foreign policy thinking across government, unquote. Another stated goal, one more aimed at acquiring the people who could achieve this vision for the Foreign Service, was to become, quote, the best diplomatic service in the world, unquote. Other nations have had diplomatic academies for many years, and they've sought more modest goals. The German Diplomatic Academy focuses on purposefully and strategically networking with counterparts from other nations. The French Academy places high value on mentoring junior officers. Now, there are lessons to be learned from the other countries about the professional education of America's diplomats, but of course, our academy has to be rooted in the American experience. In the period of rebuilding that lies ahead, I hope that the State Department and its Foreign Service will take a close look at the professional formation of career diplomats. One thing I learned as Secretary of State was that the culture of the service did not reward people with promotions or postings for the efforts they made to improve their knowledge base by taking courses at the Foreign Service Institute or at universities. In a promotion system where failure to achieve promotions results in dismissals from the service, this attitude is a powerful disincentive to spend much time in educational institutions. I hope that attitude is changing because there's a large body of knowledge that diplomats should have mastered, or at least have some